I've been thinking about my niece in Canada, and I was just wondering how her sons would fare if the family decided to come back to Britain. Well, it should be easy, shouldn't it? Both her and her husband would get good jobs. They've got enough money to buy a nice house. We've got a big extended family just longing to welcome them back. And of course they all speak English. So everything would be fine for the children, or would it? Actually, I don't think it would. They'd have lost all their friends, all their toys, all their winter sports. And their expectations of school would be different. What they'd learnt in Canadian schools would be different from what the teachers would expect in Britain. So, although they would be fine, really, there would be quite a time where they grieved for what they'd lost and where they were unhappy. So, if that's how it is for Canadian children of an English mother, what would it be like for children coming to Britain from a culture that's very different from this, speaking a different language, coming from a different religion? The pressures on them and their grief and their loss are much more difficult for them to come to terms with. So I think the first thing we need to be thinking of is the children as people. So our first priority for beginners is thinking of how they're feeling. And actually, we need to be particularly aware of some of our children who have seen some terrible things. So they may well have lost parents or siblings or certainly members of their family who may have been killed. And we have seen so many awful stories about refugees fleeing from war zones that we know that some children have suffered terribly. So our first priority is to think of those children as human beings and see how they're feeling, and in particular relieve their distress if that is necessary, and often, almost always, it will be. Relieve our pupils' distress. I went to see Pamela teaching. Oh, Pamela's not her real name, by the way. And she was working with a group of 8 children who were quietly getting on with their writing. But her job there, she was a peripatetic teacher, and she was supposed to be supporting the learning of one particular Gujarati-speaking girl. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I think EAL pupils need to be interacting with other children. So I looked at what was going on and I thought, this teacher doesn't know what she's doing. So I thought, oh well, I'll show her. So I turned to her and said, Pamela, do you mind if I demonstrate a little technique? And of course she's a lovely woman. So she said, oh, that's fine, Gordon. So I did one of my little games. Yes, right. Within 2 minutes, I had got total chaos. Pamela was an excellent teacher. And what I hadn't realised was that she was working with the special needs group, and they all needed to be working quietly and focusedly, and she was just brilliant, and she'd got them all doing something positive. But actually it wasn't right for the Gujarati-speaking girl. So the question is, why was the Gujarati-speaking girl in that group? That wasn't the best group for her. She needed a group where it was okay to talk and interact with others. There's often teachers simply put new children, just who don't speak much English, into the bottom group, into the special needs group. That is not usually the best place for them. They need a group of pupils, other children, who are going to work with them, support them, and where it's safe to have noise going on and where they can interact. So I was giving this talk one day and a secondary teacher came up to me and said, are you saying we shouldn't put EAL pupils in the bottom set? And inside I thought, duh, of course that's what I'm saying, but of course I didn't say that. I said, yes, that's right. Afterwards I thought, actually, I'm glad he spoke to me, because what was going on in his school was that's the normal thing to do. That's what the deputy head, that's what the head of SEN was saying. Yes, of course these children can't involve themselves in an ordinary class. Put them in the special needs group where they'll get the most support. But actually that's not the best group. They're not then working with their peers, with pupils learning as fast as they are. They're not in a safe environment where it's okay to talk and learn from other people. So that's my second priority. Our second priority is we need to think very carefully about where we're grouping children and who we put them with. They need to be with other pupils who can support their learning. Oh, now I often get people saying, oh, but that'll hurt the learning progress of other children. Now there's something you need to know. I remember about 10% of what I'm told. Oh, now my wife disputes that. She thinks it's somewhere around 1%. You remember about 25% of what you see and about 55% of what you do, but you remember 80% of what you teach. So actually, if we've got some children teaching other children, the children who are helping will actually be learning faster and quicker themselves. So group children so they can get peer support, and that will actually help the children who are supporting them. My third priority follows directly on from that. Having grouped the children so that they can receive pupil support, peer support, and can interact with other pupils, we obviously need to organise interaction between pupils. Well, lots of my videos talk about that, so I'll move on to the fourth. So my fourth priority is that we need to support pupils' understanding. Pictures, real objects, first language, stories, anything which helps them to understand the English we're using. But that's a crucial thing that we need to bear in mind all the time. And my fifth priority is that we need to analyse the pupils' real needs. Often pupils get started at basic reading, but actually before that they need a whole load of other thoughts. We need to think about what language they need to get around the school safely. We need to think about how they have polite English, how they have sufficient vocabulary to survive in the dining room. We need to think in that sort of level and not just simply start them off at the lowest level of the books because they actually have other needs. I've just realised I've forgotten to talk about emergency language. For some pupils, the most important English they need to know is "I'm allergic to peanuts" or "my inhaler is in my bag." Or even just something simple like "I don't like cabbage." Really important language that we need to think of before we do anything that's at all academic. And my final and sixth priority is simply to talk to other people. In most classrooms now there are a couple of adults, and sometimes 3 or even 4 at times. So we need to be all talking together and ensuring that we have liaised and understand what those pupils' needs are, and we have a group decision about the best way forward for them and what we need to be focusing on. We need that for all pupils, of course. EAL work is good practice for all pupils, but we need to make sure that for our children who are learning EAL, that we have shared the principles that we're working on, shared our priorities, and make sure we're all working in the same direction. Okay, those are my 6 priorities. I'm sure there are lots of other important ones. You might like to let me know what you think other priorities should be.